All right, welcome back, everybody. Overreaction Monday underway. Still plenty to overreact to coming up later on in the show. I'm just excited the Jets won a football game yesterday. There were 8 teams that won football games on Saturday to move on to the second round of the FCS Playoffs, which will begin 11 a.m. on Saturday. Again, don't ask me why we got all the game times clustered. It's not for television, I can tell you that, because all the games are streaming outside of one this coming weekend. We had to deal with it on Saturday. I know it was about 3:30. I was looking around. There were no other games going on. I'm sure our first guest was doing the same thing as Sam Herder joins us each and every Monday to get us out of the chute here at 9:35. I felt like the John Travolta meme in Pulp Fiction, just looking around at 3:30. There were no other FCS games going on. What we got a few road teams to win, 3 of them, in fact. Which is more than we've had over the last couple of years. I'll start with that. Was that surprising at all to see that many road teams win on Saturday?
Yeah, a little bit. Usually, in the first round, things maybe don't go as chalk, but as we get deeper into the playoffs, it seems like a lot of results do go chalk. But in the first round, I thought maybe 2 road teams would have a good opportunity to get wins, but to see 3, I think at least makes it a bit more exciting. You don't want to see, just all the higher seeds advance throughout the bracket. So it was we had a couple of blowouts, but and some comeback wins, some close games as well. So it was overall a really exciting first round. Like you said, kind of wish they would have spread it out a little bit more. I think team travel was maybe a reason why, like get everyone back, at the same time. I think that's the reason why. But at the same time, yeah, you were eyes were all over the place when all these games were going on at once.
All right, at about 1:30 Saturday, like I mentioned earlier in the show, everybody was dunking on me, and I'm sure you as well. Like, oh, well, the Ivy League, they didn't deserve anything, let alone 2, which they were very right at that time. And then a funny thing happened in the end, and we'll get to the Yale-Youngstown game here in a second. But how did that play out in your mind? Did it make it better, the fact that Yale won, or was it we still have some work to do here with the Ivy League?
Well, I mean, it helps with that they came back to win and to win that game, and like that helps, but it's still like maybe that overshadows the Harvard performance a little bit, but at the same time, it was a pretty good weekend for the Ivy League, but still not a great one.
Yeah.
And like I tweeted, like I think during halftime when Yale and Harvard were getting blown out, like saying, hey, like I was excited about the Ivy League joining the playoffs, but I also said like early on, whether it's the first round or the second round, like they're going to get a wake up call about what it takes to compete at a national level. And of course, after Yale won, like some fans were saying, well, this didn't age well. And my response was, well, half of it did, and the other half is probably going to be true next weekend because Yale's probably going to get that wake up call, like I was talking about when they go to Montana State. So there still is, the Harvard performance that was very, very ugly. Obviously, give credit to Villanova there, where you can say, well, Harvard didn't deserve, to get in. The Ivy League doesn't deserve that second bid. At the same time, hindsight is what it is, and at the time, like Harvard was looking like a good team. They were 9-1, and so it's always easy when results happen to kind of go back and say this team shouldn't have been seated here or this team shouldn't have gotten in. But like overall at the time, I didn't really have a problem with Harvard getting in.
All right, so we're picking it up here. Highlights just a little early, but so again to recap, Yale was down 35-7 to Youngstown State at halftime. It was 42-14 in the third quarter. They got a couple stops on Bo Brungard, which I'm not going to underestimate that nobody could do that in the Missouri Valley this year. UND was the one team that boxed him in, and after they did that, Josh Pitzenberger was the Ivy League Player of the Year. Sam scored the go-ahead touchdown. I'm watching it live like, this is going to happen. Yale is going to beat Youngstown State. I'm sitting there. I couldn't believe it, and Brungard looked completely flustered in a way he did not in the 12 regular season games that I saw him play this year.
Yeah, Yale made such great adjustments, and they spied Brungard a lot better in the second half. And you go back to the first half, and it just felt like Youngstown State's speed took Yale, a little bit by surprise. Where it seemed like Yale defenders were confident they had a good angle on Youngstown State offensive players, and that wasn't the case. And so they adjusted pretty well to that in the second half, and it was just kind of a case in point of when another team seizes momentum and then the other team doesn't make
Yeah.
adjustments to try to stop that momentum, this is what happens. And toward the end of the third quarter there, where there was the Yale touchdown, they force a turnover, they score again. At that point, it still is a two-possession game with Youngstown State winning, but you kind of just felt like, momentum is going on Yale's side, and they got huge stops, some fourth down stops, some big drives as well. I think the score to make it a one-possession game was a fourth down play for Yale. So there were so many key moments
Yeah.
there for Yale, and they adjusted so well for that. One of the more historic comebacks in the playoffs.
So now it's a trip to Bozeman, which again, we know exactly what they're going to get themselves into here, but is this already a success? The fact they dominated Harvard. Like, I think everybody in that game was thinking Harvard's going to win. They dominated Harvard, and they came back and won here. This is already, in my mind, a success for Yale, whatever happens on Saturday.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know if anyone really, especially after Harvard lost, in the regular season finale, like had Harvard won, maybe they could have been a top 8 seed. And
Yeah.
we were talking about Harvard, like maybe they're a quarterfinalist team. But when the bracket came out, I think we all expected there's probably not going to be an Ivy League in the quarterfinals. They'll be happy to get one team in the second round, and that team will be Yale. We'll see if they could, compete well with Montana State. I kind of feel like they're going to run into a buzzsaw there, but I mean, heck, Youngstown State was on a heater, and they were able to control Brungard a little bit in the second half and get a comeback win. So certainly, Yale feels good about where they're at, and they'll take their chances in Bozeman.
We have a poll question up now, Sam, of who had the most impressive weekend: Yale, South Dakota State, UND, or South Dakota among those four. Who would you vote for?
Yeah, I think maybe you would go with UND just because they did it on the road and they did it against a team that, I think technically UND was favored to win that game by a little bit, but still, if you go by seeds and being on the road, going to Tennessee Tech, I think UND, I would vote for the Fighting Hawks in that one. It was a much more competitive game than the final score showed. It was the defensive battle. Both defensive lines and just overall defenses both played really well. But UND, forcing a couple of interceptions or fumbles as well. They just kind of started to grind down Tennessee Tech, and the defensive line for Tennessee Tech really played well, but they kind of got grinded down on as well. So UND would have my vote there. I thought South Dakota State looked really good as well. Obviously, they just totally overmatched New Hampshire. Chase Mason looked sharp. Defensively looked really good for South Dakota State as well. So the Jacks, no doubt, are now look like an even more dangerous team as they go to Missoula.
All right, so let's look at the updated bracket here. As we're down to 16 teams. The Bison will have Illinois State. We'll get into that coming up with Kolpak here in our next hour. Illinois State they did what they needed to do against a Southeastern Louisiana team that was offensively challenged. Is that maybe the best way to describe what we saw out of the Lions on Saturday?
Yeah, it was another game that was closer than the final score indicated, but it was kind of just Illinois State kind of slowly wore Southeastern down a bit there, pulled away in the fourth quarter. And yeah, it was definitely a defensive battle. Both offenses had flashes where they looked like they were maybe going to go in and score, but yeah, Illinois State kind of just did what they had to do to advance.
For the game everyone's going to talk about, we will in a second, is the Jacks in Montana. Give me 2 quick minutes here on Abilene Christian. I thought ACU was great. They dominated Lamar. I think they're going to go and beat Stephen F. Austin. I think ACU might be better this year than they were with Maverick McIver last year.
Yeah, I think defensively they're better. Offensively, they might not be as dynamic, but Abilene is still can be explosive offensively. Stone Earle is their quarterback now. Kind of interesting story with him because he started as a true freshman at Abilene Christian. Then he transferred and had a couple of stops in the FBS. And then he comes back to Abilene Christian for his senior year, and he's playing really well. They have some really great weapons on the outside. Abilene going to SFA is one of the more intriguing second round matchups because it's a second round, or it's a regular season rematch. Abilene Christian beat SFA earlier this year. I think it was 28-20. SFA is playing much better now than they were at the start of the year. So I think SFA, is a dangerous team as well, but Abilene Christian is that team that when they turn it on, we've seen them do that in the regular season against ranked teams like Tarleton State, where they got to win. They can really play super well. That is definitely an intriguing matchup here.
I think a lot of people are looking, Sam, at South Dakota going to Mercer as a potential pathway for the Coyotes to the quarterfinals. What do you make there?
Yeah, I like that matchup as well. We'll see, just how good Mercer is. Mercer's defense isn't close to where it was last year,
No.
but they still have some really good players. Andrew Zock is phenomenal defensive end for Mercer. Offensively for the Bears, they are light years better than what they were last year. Than what they showed in the playoffs just was not a good offensive team. Braden Atkinson is one of the best overall
Really
quarterbacks
good.
in the FCS. He's just a freshman, so offensively super explosive. You just like South Dakota is rolling right now. Like they're playing so well defensively, offensively they're just clicking so much better as well. Nice balance of passing and running as well. So South Dakota carries a lot of momentum going to Mercer.
All right, so we talked about this when the bracket came out last Monday on potential South Dakota State likely going to win. They're going to get the Grizz. This is the third year in a row they're going to play in the playoffs. They met obviously in Frisco last year in this exact round in Brookings, and the Jacks handled them. What do we make of what this game could be on Saturday?
Yeah, it gets even more intriguing with Chase Mason coming back and looking like he didn't skip a beat. If anything, he looked even more comfortable against New Hampshire. He looked incredibly sharp, and I'm sure he was taking a lot of mental reps as well. And so just seeing how he goes through his progression and just the arm strength he had because he was whipping it around
Yeah.
in some snow, and I think there was a little bit of wind as well. So that makes this game even more intriguing for South Dakota State going to Montana. And the offensive line for the Jacks as well was just, came into this year with high expectations. I thought played well the first few games, but then really had a lull for most of the second half of the season. And they switched some things around on the offensive line, and they're really generating, a great push. I thought they had a good push against UND. I thought they had a really good push this last weekend. I'm still in Montana's run defense isn't that strong. Like we saw Montana State really control the trenches in that game a couple of weeks ago at Montana. I'm still curious about pass protection for South Dakota State. One of the biggest problems was just that it seemed like they consistently had defensive players just knifing through
Yeah.
the offensive line, and that's what Montana does well. Like they're stunting on the defensive line, they're blitzing a lot. So I really like how South Dakota State's offensive line is playing, but how do they go up against a pressure-heavy Montana team? That's a very interesting matchup within the game right here.
Winning there is, Bison couldn't do it a couple years ago. The Jacks have never done it. That is you've been there. You know how difficult Washington Grizzly is to win out. And the star power in here, Gilman, Ayat, Wortham, we know the Jack stars. This is not a second-round game, but it ends up being the case this year.
Yeah, it's kind of like the NDSU Montana State second round game from a couple of years ago, and that matchup happened because it was regionalized, right? That was back when it was still only 8 seeds. I know Montana fans aren't happy with this matchup, but I think we talked about it last week. Like South Dakota State is playing much better now than being like the 14 seed, but at the time they were 8-4. Chase Mason hadn't come back yet. We didn't know if he was coming back. The playoff committee didn't know if he was coming back. So South Dakota State being the 13, 14, 15 seed made sense at the time. Now you see how they looked against New Hampshire. You go, this might be a top 8 team in the country, but they're seeded number 14 and they have to go to Montana. And like you said, going to Washington Grizzly is going to be a heck of a challenge. I'm not sure who I'm going to pick just yet, but having that home field advantage, I think could carry a lot of weight for the Grizz.
All right, last thing for you off the field. Both Tim Polasek and Brent Vegan are staying at their jobs after being courted by Group of 5 power, however you want to term them, job, basically the same job at Oregon State. What does that say to you about each of those potential jobs now that are not open at North Dakota State or Montana State?
Yeah, it's great for the FCS, but great for those programs as well to have that commitment from their head coaches. It sounds like donors, certainly have stepped up to keep Polasek. It sounds like Montana State is asking, donors to step up to kind of fund their head coaching position, even more and, better assistant coaching salary pools and more resources and all that. So I think it's definitely a good sign that those two are committed to those programs, at least for now. Like we're going to be in this discussion, again next year when there's openings and Polisek's and Vegan's name will be out there as well. But my first thought was, that the donors like just stepped up, to keep these guys. Maybe there are some FBS ties in there, but I don't know if it's like an A to B sort of tie. I think that's maybe like a long term, like, well, maybe there's that possibility out there, but I don't know if there's anything imminent happening on the FBS front, whether it's for NDSU or for Montana State, which if it was for Montana State, it would also have to be for Montana. So
yeah.
I know a lot of people jump to that conclusion, on social media, in my mention saying like, well, the only reason NUSC would do this is because they're going to FBS. And my response was, well, maybe, but they're also doing this to keep Paul Sick. Like they're putting these resources in to keep their head coach. So we'll see what happens in the long term. But I think no doubt a good sign for these two programs to be able to keep their head coaches.
Great way to start our show, bud. Thanks for the time as always. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next Monday, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
There you go. Sam Herder joining us each and every Monday to get us started with a recap of everything we saw this weekend. Much more on the FCS games coming up in our second hour, including some highlights of the wins by the Jacks, by UND, South Dakota. Much more on that Yale comeback over Youngstown State. All right, we'll break. We'll wrap up our first hour. Jeff Kolpak coming up to dive us into Bison football chatter on the head football coach and a look ahead to round 2 of the Redbirds. That's coming up when we come back.